As Julius Caesar crushed Celtic Gaul in his ruthless campaigns, the region was pulled into the Roman Empire, and with that conquest came a turning point in the story of what would one day become France. Gaul lost its independence, but in the process it evolved into something new, a blended culture shaped by both Celtic traditions and Roman influence. Roman administration, roads, infrastructure, and economic systems took root, laying the groundwork for France's future foundations. But Rome wouldn't stay strong forever. As imperial power faded and Rome's eastern borders weakened, new waves of migrant Germanic peoples poured into Gaul. Their arrival provided the final piece of the puzzle in the transformation of post-Roman Gaul into the early form of France. Long before all this, the Celts had been forced out of Italy after the Battle of Telamon in 225 BC, but they still dominated the region we now call France. Over the following centuries, though, the balance of power slowly shifted against them. After Brennus famously sacked Rome, the Romans eventually struck back, moving north beyond their traditional borders during the First Transalpine War, 125 to 121 BC. This territory, modern northern Italy, had been held by Celtic tribes for generations, but Rome was determined to take it. Part of the motivation was revenge. Some Gallic tribes had supported Hannibal during the Punic Wars, and Rome hadn't forgotten. When Quintus Fabius Maximus defeated the Allobroges and the Arverni, Rome established the province of Gallia Narbonensis, literally, our province. This became Rome's first foothold north of the Alps, and a major turning point in French history. The conquest proved immediately valuable. It created a land route to Roman Spain, established a defensive buffer to prevent another traumatic Celtic attack on Italy, and opened new economic opportunities. It also pulled the wealthy Greek trading hub of Massalia, modern Marseille, into Rome's sphere. That expansion paved the way for the founding of the city of Narbo. Built along the very first Roman road ever laid in Gaul, this new province helped lock down Rome's grip on Mediterranean trade routes. From here, Roman legions could move quickly, strike deep into formerly tribal lands, and maintain a strong foothold in the region. For the Celtic communities living there, this was a major blow, not only to their independence, but also to the unity of their remaining tribal alliances, many of which were now split over how to respond to Rome's advance. Still, outside of this southern territory, most of Gaul remained under Celtic control, at least for the moment. That balance was about to change dramatically with the arrival of Julius Caesar and his sweeping campaign across Gaul. Beginning in 58 BC, Caesar's invasion marked yet another decisive turning point in the story of what would one day become France. On the eve of his conquest, the Gallic tribes were prosperous and sophisticated, boasting major settlements and intricate political systems. In many ways, this era was a cultural high point for the Celts, fueled by trade and the exchange of ideas with Rome. Their craftsmanship thrived, metalworking, weapon forging, and artistic expression reached impressive new heights. Archaeology reveals beautifully decorated iron swords, distinctive armor, and finely crafted spearheads. But despite their skill and wealth, the tribes shared one fatal weakness. They weren't unified. Their loose coalitions and temporary alliances simply couldn't match the discipline and cohesion of Rome's armies, a factor that shaped everything that came next. Caesar's campaign stretched across vast regions: modern France, Switzerland, Belgium, and even Britain. Leading 30,000 soldiers, he first clashed with the Helvetii at Bibrecht and the Suebi at Vosges. Both were hard-fought battles, but Roman organization and Caesar's command ultimately secured victory. He also pushed into what is now Brittany in northwest France, taking on the Veneti masters of naval warfare. Here, most fighting happened at sea, showcasing the diversity of combat during the campaign. Despite the Veneti commanding a stronger fleet, Rome adapted quickly. Their innovative use of grappling hooks tore apart Venetian sails, crippling ships that depended on wind power, while Roman vessels driven by oars kept full control. The entire campaign was a harsh and relentless military operation, leaving a deep scar across Gaul. Although Caesar's own numbers are almost certainly exaggerated, it's likely that hundreds of thousands of Celtic warriors and civilians died during the conflict. Some of Caesar's actions were so ruthless that even Rome was shocked. One infamous example was the total slaughter of a civilian Gallic encampment in 55 BC, a massacre so brutal that it outraged several Roman officials and even led some senators to demand that Caesar be put on trial. Through 54 BC, many Gallic tribes continued to rise up, showing that Caesar had not yet fully conquered the region. His response was merciless. He didn't just aim to win battles, he set out to break the tribes as functioning societies. His forces targeted crops, herds, and villages, and launched raids to capture slaves. These harsh tactics steadily wore down the northern tribes, and much of the area was subdued in the years that followed. But the Celts of what is now France weren't ready to give in completely. They prepared for one last determined stand. By this point, most tribal leaders understood that Rome's ambitions threatened their very existence, not just their borders. It was a fight for survival. In this desperate moment, the highly respected chieftain Vercingetorix stepped forward to unite the remaining Celtic resistance. As the charismatic ruler of the Arverni, he managed to bring together a broad coalition of tribes, something that had long been missing in Gallic warfare. After 2 early clashes with Rome, including one victory, the rebellion reached its decisive moment at Alesia in modern Burgundy. There, the Celtic forces held a fortified hilfort belonging to an allied tribe and waited for Caesar's arrival. Rather than repeat costly assaults from earlier in the campaign, Caesar took a different approach. He constructed his own massive ring of fortifications around Alesia and settled in for a siege, aiming to starve the defenders into submission. Vercingetorix, anticipating this, had arranged for a large relief army to strike the Romans from behind. But he underestimated how extensive the Roman defenses would be. Despite repeated attempts to break the siege attacks from inside the fort, assaults by the relief force, and coordinated pushes from both directions, the Romans held firm. One Gallic effort after another fell apart. Eventually, the relief army scattered, leaving Alesia isolated. With no options left, Vercingetorix surrendered. The dramatic scene, him riding out and laying his weapons before Caesar, was later immortalized in an 1889 painting. This defeat marked a pivotal moment in the shaping of the future French nation. It signaled the collapse of the last major, unified Celtic resistance and cleared the way for full Roman domination of Gaul. Vercingetorix's fate was as grim as that of many Celtic peoples in the decades before him. After his surrender, he spent 6 long years in a Roman prison before being paraded through Rome and executed. As part of a public spectacle, an undignified end for a courageous and respected leader. With his death, independent Gaul effectively ceased to exist. The region was firmly under Roman control, and although small uprisings continued for a while, this moment marked the beginning of a new era, one defined by Romanization. Rome divided the former Celtic lands into several provinces, joining the already established Gallia Narbonensis. One of the major new provinces was Gallia Lugdunensis, which stretched from central France all the way to northwest Brittany. It was named after its capital, Lugdun, modern-day Lyon, chosen for its crucial location where the Rhine and Saône rivers meet. Over time, Lugdun became a major administrative and cultural hub, acting as a key link between Italy and the northern and western regions of Gaul. Roman infrastructure soon reshaped these lands. Aqueducts, roads, amphitheaters, and monumental buildings transformed the landscape, laying down foundations that would influence the identity of the future French nation. Romanization didn't happen overnight, but its effects were profound. After the destruction and trauma of Caesar's wars, and as the generation that had lived through the conflict slowly passed, Celtic tribal systems gave way to Roman civic structures. Over time, elite Gauls began integrating into the Roman state, gaining status and positions, though full Roman citizenship for the wider population wouldn't arrive until 212 AD. Rome also reshaped Gaul's economy. Improved farming methods, stronger trade networks, and growing local industries tied the region more closely to Roman prosperity. Latin became the official language of administration, planting the seeds that would eventually evolve into Old French. Another defining shift for the future France also took shape in this era, the gradual move away from Celtic religious traditions and toward Christianity, a transformation that would leave a lasting imprint on the identity of the region. Unlike many of the changes happening in Gaul, the spread of Christianity grew in spite of Rome, not because of it. By the 2nd century AD, Christian teachings were already flowing into Gaul through merchants and travelers coming from the Levant. The message found eager listeners among the formerly pagan population, offering a powerful sense of unity in a land long divided by tribal identities. This growth accelerated during the reigns of emperors Marcus Aurelius and Decius, producing some of the earliest and most iconic Christian figures in future French history, such as Saint Denis of Paris, who was executed for his faith in the mid-3rd century, and the martyrs of Lyon, killed by wild animals under Aurelius in 177 AD. Their deaths helped spark a rebellious spirit among many in Gaul and deepened the cultural distance between the region and Rome. This rising sense of separate identity played a major role in the Gallic Empire of the 3rd century. Though its creation had many causes, one key factor behind its endurance was the strong feeling of cultural uniqueness within Gaul, a sentiment that had fueled early Christianity's growth well before it gained traction in Rome. Even after Postumus's breakaway state was eventually crushed and Gaul brought back under imperial control, this spirit of defiance didn't fade. The Bagaudae uprisings from the 3rd to 5th centuries were another sign of this growing divide. These revolts, led mostly by peasants in western Gaul, pushed back against the harsh realities of late Roman rule. While they were never powerful enough to topple Roman authority, their persistence over centuries showed that the fierce resilience first seen under Vercingetorix still lived on. Meanwhile, Germanic migration into the region had been increasing since the 3rd century crisis weakened the empire. At first, Rome tried to push these groups back, but as imperial power declined, they were eventually forced to accept them, often through arrangements like the foederati system. This movement of peoples would provide the final ingredient in the formation of what would eventually become France. This wave of migration didn't just weaken Rome's grip on its former lands. It completely reshaped the cultural landscape of Gaul. Romano-Celtic identity that had been forming since before Caesar's conquests now faced a new layer of change, as large groups arrived from the east with their own distinct traditions and ways of life. As the Roman Empire continued to fall apart throughout the 5th century, one power structure disappeared and another began to rise. While the Visigoths pushed deeper into Rome's core territories, the Franks, another Germanic people, steadily expanded from their homeland into Gaul. With Roman authority collapsing, the Franks filled the vacuum, setting up power bases across central and northern France. When Rome finally faded, these new Frankish realms began to unify and grow stronger, first under Childeric, and then under his son Clovis I, founder of the Merovingian dynasty. Clovis became the driving force behind Frankish supremacy, bringing all of northern Gaul under his control by 494 AD. His conversion to Christianity around 496 AD helped bridge the cultural gap between his warriors and the Gallic population he aimed to govern, while also winning support from the Catholic Church. Over the following years, another wave of cultural blending began. These Germanic newcomers formed the last major influence needed for the birth of a new country, Francia, a name derived from the Franks themselves. Despite centuries of hardship, from Caesar's brutal conquest to long years under Roman rule Gaul never fully lost its independent spirit or distinct character. Celtic culture may have blended with Roman traditions, but the memory of fierce resistance leaders like Vercingetorix remained alive. Even during the prosperous periods of Roman Gaul, uprisings still flared up, from early rebellions to the later Bagaudae revolts. The arrival of Eastern Germanic groups was disruptive, but it ultimately became the final building block for the rise of the French nation. The Franks stepped into the ruins of Roman power, built their own system on top of it, and thanks to their adoption of Christianity, aligned themselves with the beliefs of the Gallic people they ruled. And with that, the stage was set for a brand new era in the story of France.